I'll take this opportunity to thank Babani and ICTS team in helping organize the program. Okay, so today I'm going to speak about localization and quantum state transfer in a cavity QED network. And basically, in this talk, I'll be speaking about two parts. So this work is done with a postdoc, with my postdoc Amit Dey. And in the first part, I'm going to talk about localization in a cavity QED network. And details are in this paper. In the second part, I'm going to talk about quantum state transfer in a cavity QED network, and the details are in this paper. So, so let me go into the setup, and please feel free to ask me questions and this thing. So, so now, so basically, the system that we are interested in is basically given here. So this is Jane's. So just 1 second. I'm unable to move my. So I'm unable to use my pen. Okay. Now it should be fine. Yeah. So the system of interest is basically this Jaynes-Cummings array. So this is what I would call one unit. So essentially, each unit is basically made of a cavity which is hosting a two-level system, and basically there is coupling between the cavities. Okay, so so this fundamental unit is the Jaynes-Cummings model, and you see that there is coupling between the cavities here, and you have n such units, and each unit has a dissipation cavity dissipation kappa and a qubit dissipation gamma. Okay, so and then each unit can in principle be driven by a microwave drive. So every unit is given by this Jaynes-Cummings model that is given here. Okay, so so here we have an example of a driven dissipative. Sorry, is my slides visible, because I cannot see them?
Yes, this is visible. Yeah, but yeah, so far it's visible. Yeah,
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't see the title. Okay.
Okay, you can see the title now, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So so there's a microwave drive, and this is basically the Jaynes-Cummings model that is given here. So so there are typically two regimes. One is the dispersive regime, where omega c minus omega q is far greater than g, and this basically effectively makes it a weak Bose-Hubbard model. And then there is another unit, which is another limit, which is the resonant case. Sorry, I'm this. My slides are not appearing to me itself, so that's okay. So the resonant case, which in some sense is the case of strongest unharmonicity. Okay, so this is the system of interest. Now, just to set the stage, the Hamiltonian is given in this form here, and you see that there is hopping between the cavities, which is given here by this J term. Okay, and each of the unit is essentially given by this Jaynes-Cummings model, but there is a drive here, which is basically implemented in a rotating wave approximation. So there's a drive, so it's a driven Jaynes-Cummings model. Okay, so this driven Jaynes-Cummings model, which is further subject to dissipative effects, is basically given in this form, and this is the Lindblad-Master equation description for this model. And now the question is, what are we interested in? What are the quantities of interest? So the quantities of interest is typically, let's say, the occupation number of the bosons in each unit, or some spin degrees of freedom. Some spin degrees of freedom. So more importantly, what we are interested in is this I'm sorry, there is a lot of technical issues here. One second. Okay, I am sorry about this. So, okay, so what we're interested in is in something called population imbalance, which is basically the occupation number of the bosons, photons in this case, um, uh, the imbalance between the odd sector occupations and even sector occupations. So I hope this is clear. So this is something that we are interested in. So the question we are asking is the following. Let us say you populate every odd sector by bosons, and then you let the system evolve. Okay, then the question is what happens to this imbalance? And then the study of this imbalance gives you some idea of whether the system is self-trapped. Okay, so let us say I occupy every alternate unit. Okay, this is every alternate unit here. So every alternate unit is 1, 3, 5, 7, and so on. So the imbalance to begin with by this formula is just 1. But the question is what happens to this imbalance as a function of time? So that will give you an idea whether these bosons are able to tunnel through the different cavities, or are they stuck, and so on and so forth. So this is the quantity of interest that I'm going to discuss here. Okay, so the question is, why are we interested in it? So basically, such a system has actually been realized a while ago at Princeton, where there was an experimental example for 2 units. And indeed, they saw that in some parameter regime, it can happen that the photons can get self-trapped in 1 unit. Okay, so this is a plot where you can see that there is a localized regime and then there's a delocalized regime. So what happens is that so you say you have 2 units, and you occupy the first unit by some bosons. It turns out that when you do the time evolution, this just gets stuck, although in principle there's a tunneling element. So this is basically self-trapping. But in experiment, they did not have additional drive mechanism. So you have these unavoidable dissipative effects. So because of dissipation, eventually the cavities become vacuum, and the qubits will go to the ground state. So if there is no drive, the steady state is in some sense trivial. So the question is, how do you understand the systems in the presence of a drive? Okay, so can I drive the system in a delicate way such that I end up with some highly non-trivial steady states in terms of, for example, the imbalance of the system? Okay, so this is the motivation. And of course, there are beautiful experiments at Princeton where they have already realized a system of 72 such units here, where so there are these engineered systems where one can study this physics of self-trapping and localization and so on. So that is the motivation of this part of the talk. So just to summarize, the idea is you have these units, and you basically try to have some non-trivial initial condition, like a analog of a charged W wave. So you occupy every alternate site, and then you see whether they get stuck there. Okay, even though there is a facility to tunnel through the different units. Okay, so let me go to the results. So basically, so you have seen the system, and this is the results for 2 units. Because you have 2 units, we start with the initial state where you have 10 bosons in the first cavity, 0 bosons in the second cavity, and both the spins in the first and the second are in ground state. Okay, so now the question is, and this is the kappa and gamma, which is all experimentally motivated. Okay, so now the question is, suppose I have 2 units and I have 10 bosons on the left unit. What would happen in time? Okay, so these are some of the results. So let us look at the results vertically like this. Okay, so you see these. So what happens is that this is some light matter coupling G1 G2. So this is just within each unit, the cavity interacts with its own qubit with this interaction, and this is undriven. So there's no drive, but there is dissipation. Okay, so obviously you see that initially there is an imbalance. The imbalance is 1, but then it basically goes down. Okay, and this is how the population of the first unit. This is the first unit. and this is the population of the second unit. So if there is no drive, the imbalance is sort of maintained for some time, but then because of dissipation, you eventually lose everything. Okay, so now this is the second plot here, where you have drive, okay, and you have some light matter interaction, but then the drive is not enough. So eventually you again lose imbalance. Okay, eventually you again lose imbalance. So this is the case where you are unable to sustain the imbalance. Okay. Now, this is the third situation where you have light matter interaction and where you have a drive, and notice that for indefinitely long time, you end up getting imbalance of 1, which means that the occupation of the first cavity is non-zero and the occupation of the second cavity is 0, which means that the system is basically self-trapped. Okay, so this is the situation where we start with 2 units, and you essentially end up with a situation where there is a self-trapped state.
I have a
Okay,
question.
Yes.
But does this happen only when G1 is 0, or it happens also when G1 is a bit small but not 0?
Very good. So in fact, I anticipated this question, and I have a next slide. So this is just a parameter regime where it happens. But in the next slide, you see a situation where both G1 and G2 are non-zero. Okay, and here again we have an indefinitely long-lived self-trap state. Okay, so it's a complicated interplay between a G, which is light matter interaction, drive, and dissipation effects. So indeed, it is not necessary that G1 has to be 0. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah.
Manas.
Yes.
So in all this simulation, G has been treated exactly in a sense of master equation.
That's right. So these are exact quantum calculations after you start with the Lindblad master equation. That's right. Okay. So that is the thing. So just so that we don't I'm just going to draw a schematic of this. So I have 1 unit, I have second unit, okay, and then I have a J, okay, and basically in this unit I had some amount of bosons, okay, and they basically in some sense in the steady state you still have non-zero number of bosons in this unit and almost zero bosons in this unit. So you have a self-trap state. Okay, so because
just sorry
yes.
to one more question.
Yeah.
So are you always driving one of the 2 cavities? So here.
Okay, so that is so in this calculations we drive the first cavity, okay, but this is not restrictive. You could drive drive both cavities and so on, but notice that even if you drive the first cavity, it is not sufficient to guarantee self-trapping, because those bosons may just leak out to the next cavity.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So now because it's a driven dissipative system, there is a sense of initial condition independence. So no matter what N1 and N2 you start with, we end up with a steady state which is imbalanced. So this could be useful experimentally, because you don't need to worry about the exact detail in which you prepare your initial condition. So this is an example where let us just focus on the blue this zone here. Okay, so you see we had started with 2 different initial conditions for N1. N1 is the number of bosons in the first cavity. So N1 was 0 here and N1 was about 4 or 5, I guess, here. But it doesn't matter. In the end, you see that they both reach some same steady state, and the corresponding N2 also it is independent of initial conditions. So where you started with in some sense doesn't matter, and on top of it you achieve sort of a self-trap state. Okay, so that is the its initial condition independent. Okay, so these are exact calculations, quantum calculations for 4 units, and you again have this kind of initial condition here where you have 2, 0, 2, 0 number of bosons, and then you have minus half, minus half, minus half, minus half for the qubit. Okay, so every first and the third cavity is occupied, and second and the fourth cavity is empty, and it turns out that it just remains self-trapped. So you see this calculations where N1 and N3 remain non-zero, and N2 basically N2 and N4 become zero. Okay, so so this is the thing that that you end up having imbalance, and even in multiple network systems. So notice that this notion of imbalance is as a side comment. The notion of imbalance is a very common notion nowadays, especially in the context of many-body localization and so on. It just tells you how stuck certain quantities can be in their respective units. Okay, so what are the main observations? So the main observations are for sufficiently large light matter interaction, there is a long-lived self-trapping and localization, self-trapping / localization. So notice that the interaction plays a major role. The G in the Jaynes-Cummings model plays a major role. Because if there's no G, what happens is that the imbalance basically sloshes back and forth or something like that. There could be more complicated dynamics, but basically the light matter interaction plays a crucial role. Okay, so if you have two cavities which do not talk to their qubit, and you try to calculate this imbalance, basically the imbalance goes back from 1 to -1, again 1 to -1, and so on. Okay, but as soon as you have light matter interaction, it gets blocked, it gets stuck. Okay, there is an intricate interplay between drive, dissipation, and light matter coupling. Okay, so I will explain this a little bit more. And interestingly, it turns out that you have an optimal drive strength. Okay, so you might naively think that if I just keep driving the units, like if I drive every alternate unit, then won't I just have some sort of imbalanced state? But it doesn't happen like that. You cannot overdrive it, because then there are this, if you overdrive it, it gets, it feels that it gets pushed to the next neighboring cavity and so on. Okay, so and this is just a comment for the question that was asked, that you can have the self-trapping even if the couplings are uniform and so on. Okay, so it's not like, so I guess the question arose because there was a feeling that there's a non-uniformity in the system, which is probably giving rise to self-trapping. That is not necessarily true. Even if you have a fairly uniform system, you can still have self-trapping. So that was a good question, and thanks for the question. Okay, so I will, as you see, given the recent experiments and more such experiments, there are these efforts to scale up the system, and you basically have these systems already realized in the setups are already realized in experiments. So if you want to study a large system like 100 cavities, say 100 units, we have to resort to a semi-classical approach, but from semi-classics, this is what we basically get. So this is for 100 units. Notice that at Princeton, they had 72 units which are realized essentially. So, okay, so with these 100 units, you see what happens is something very interesting. So this is basically a closed system, okay, which means no drive and no dissipation. I can still, I can still do the semi-classical calculations, and you see that if the light matter coupling is, say, beyond certain threshold, then you have perfect imbalance. Okay, you have self-trapping. If it is below, then you see that you lose imbalance. You see that the imbalance is basically sloshing from 1 to -1 and so on. Okay, so basically you lose imbalance, as you see in this inset. Okay, so there's a notion of some critical drive. There's a notion of some critical light matter interaction, where after which you can get self-trapping. Okay, so now let us see the driven dissipative system. So here something interesting happens. Notice the black line here in figure B. Okay, there's a black line which is basically here, which is basically here. So this is a case where you have right. So Okay, so notice for example, this dotted line here. So what I want to say is that if the drive is very weak, you also will not get self-trapping, and if the drive is very strong, also you will not get self-trapping. So if you see the numbers here, if the drive is 0.12, you lose self-trapping. If the drive is 0.1, you get self-trapping. So, and if the drive is 0, you again lose the self-trapping. Okay, so the main message here is that you cannot overdrive it and you cannot underdrive it. Okay, so that gives us a nice phase diagram. So this phase diagram is a diagram where you have kappa on the y-axis. This is the cavity dissipation, and you have drive on the x-axis. Okay, so let us look at the diagram. So what does this mean? Let us say I fix kappa. Let's say I fix kappa to be somewhere here. Okay, so this basically means that if I have very weak drive, you look at this blue region number 1, this region here. Okay, this region is underdriven and non-self-trapped. And let's say you increase drive, you reach the yellow region where it is appropriately driven and it is indefinitely self-trapped. Okay, and then you keep crossing and you overdrive it, and you again lose the self-trapping. So this is basically saying that there is a big window, fairly big window of drive strengths which are accessible experimentally, where you can get indefinitely self-trapped states. And when you underdrive it or overdrive it, you lose the self-trapping. So these are basically semi-classical results for 100 units, because the exact quantum calculation is very difficult in this region, but it basically tells you that there is a notion of getting trapped states in driven dissipative systems.
So Manas, just to make sure the semi-classical limit, this is like decoupling of the matter and the cavity thing.
That's right.
The correlation.
That's right. So basically, just to say what we mean by that, we just mean that if you had something like SZ, we basically approximate to ASZ. Okay.
Fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Of course, we checked it whenever possible. We did check that semi-classical results and exact quantum results agree in certain regions, but for that we again have to go to smaller number of units and so on. So that is the thing.
Thanks.
Okay. So how much time do I have, Vijay?
Roughly 15 minutes.
Okay. That's okay. That's good. So okay. Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So now, is there any question about this previous slides? So this is basically the idea of self-trapping in scaled-up systems, and this slide is a demonstration that even if your closed system doesn't have self-trapping, you can open up the system to reach a self-trapped state. So let us look at the first column. So let us look at this column. Okay, so this is a closed system, and it's in a regime where you see that the imbalance is basically sloshing back and forth. You basically don't have self-trapping. And if I just introduce this, okay, introduce a drive, and along with that I introduce a dissipation, I end up with a self-trap state. Okay, so this row is basically the quantum. This row is basically the fully quantum calculation. Okay, so say you're in a regime where you are subcritical, so your light matter interaction is not strong enough to assure self-trapping. What we are saying is that you take the same system and just add drive and dissipation, and you can get a self-trap state. And you can do the same thing for the semi-classical calculations also, where you can see that if I have a system which is not trapped in the isolated case, I can open up the system carefully and give rise to self-trap states. Okay, so that is basically so I wanted to just highlight that if you have an open quantum system, you might achieve self-trapping even when the closed counterpart is not self-trapped. And in the same way, by definition, this self-trapped state is indefinitely long-lived, because you just keep the drive on, and the drive and the dissipation and the interactions interplay such that forever, indefinitely, you just end up with some trapped state. Okay. Okay, so this is the conclusions of part one. So, so interactions are crucial for self-trapping. And there's a delicate balance between interactions, drive, and dissipation. I hope I convinced you that there's optimal window for driving. And this self-trap state is independent of initial conditions. Okay, so you could really start with any initial condition. It could be like some coherent state, or it could be complete vacuum. It could be just an empty cavities with qubits in the down state, and then I switch on the drive and I end up with some self-trap state. So this also basically means that the underlying Liouvillean that has been brought up in this conference is probably quite rich in structure, because it is giving rise to these steady states, which are basically quite exotic and self-trapped and so on. So that is another thing that one can independently investigate. We made comparisons between open and isolated quantum systems. And this was the last point where I said that even if the closed counterpart is subcritical, the open system can have self-trapped state. So the outlook for part one is we are discussing with people about possible experimental implementation for these predictions, and of course there is lot of room for development of theoretical techniques to study this kind of localization and self-trapping. So one needs to really develop theoretical techniques, because on one hand you have these scaled up systems, and then you have to sort of see how to develop some techniques which will address scaled up systems from a fully quantum perspective. Okay, and the last outlook is there are various geometries that are realized in experiments and which are being talked about, and we would like to study this kind of localization in these various geometries. Not only lattice geometries, but also in sort of curved spaces. And yesterday we heard a talk about a situation where you have all-to-all coupling network. So how to understand localization in these kind of fully connected networks, and in situations where you have some hyperbolic lattices and so on and so forth. And this is something that it's almost impossible to imagine in the condensed matter counterpart. So this, we are very excited about studying phenomena of localization and self-trapping in this non-trivial lattices and geometries. Okay, so yeah.
So may I ask two questions? So in this, if you take the simplest 2-unit case, and if you include the driving and sort of find the eigenstates of this total entangled system, is it fair to say that these self-trapped states can be understood somehow as some kind of subradiant states for the Liouvillean somehow? As in basically, something like that. Is this?
It's probably possible. The issue with this Liouvillean is that somehow we can't do much analytically. So the point is that we can analyze it numerically, but I guess we can. Yeah, it is possible to see what these eigenstates of this Liouvillean look like. Yeah.
So then a quick follow-up is like, is it very important that I saw that the kappa for the cavities, they were fairly small and at least less or comparable than the coherent interactions, which is of course naturally realizable in many of these systems. But I was wondering, physics-wise, is there some subtle thing that's going on that, for example, if your kappa is very large, again, there are you can adiabatically eliminate the light and you can do something. So these self-trapping effects go away in those limits, do you think?
No, actually, the thing. Okay, first of all, the self-trapping is in the photons, right? That is where the self-trapping is, right? So it sometimes happens that kappa actually helps in self-trapping. Okay, but the problem with kappa is that eventually you start losing all the bosons. So you can have a situation where actually kappa helps in maintaining the self-trap state, but because there is kappa and if there is no drive, what happens is that everything is lost. But kappa can be actually kappa can actually help the situation. So increasing kappa might even of course you have to appropriately maybe play around with the drive, but certainly I think increasing kappa can even help actually. But we sort of stayed in the experimental regime, so we did not increase kappa much.
Because again, you have a little bit more of analytical handle available. If kappa is large, I think you can really, you might get a effectively solvable model.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, so at least for 2 units or something, we plan to do something more analytically. Yeah.
So a follow-up question, Manas. So in this kind of cell-trapping state, is it interesting to see what the qubits are doing? Like,
okay. Yes. So the qubits, I mean, they have some interesting dynamics, but we have some results for the qubit sector. We haven't sorry, I hear some I hear some echo. Hello.
Go ahead, Manas.
Yeah. So we have results on the qubit sector. We haven't made a direct correlation between how they manifest themselves in the self-trapped state. But yeah, that's something. I mean, I can share you the qubit data, but we haven't really made this connection yet.
Okay. All right. Thanks. Yeah. Go ahead. You have roughly 10 minutes.
Okay. So let me go to the next part. So this part is basically entirely different, but in some sense philosophically quite opposite. So here we ask this question: if we can transfer we can do a quantum state transform from first to the last unit without really doing much in the intermediate units. Okay, so this is the idea of this part of the talk. So we have these units. Okay, now it's a slightly different setup, but I'm just schematically showing you the same kind of diagrams. So we have this unit, James Cummings units, and you see the tunneling between the cavities. The tunneling between the cavities have this time dependent form. Okay, so you see that there is this is how the pulses look here. Okay, this is how the pulses look. So now the question is, can I have a dynamics where I can start with say 20 photons in cavity A and end up with 20 photons in cavity C with almost zero occupation in cavity B in the process? Okay, so that is the kind of questions that we are asking, and this is the light matter interaction here, and this is the form of the J coupling. Okay, so different setup, but somewhat familiar, right? So let us look at the completely non-interacting part. Okay, the linear limit. Okay, when GABC is 0. Okay, so when GABC is 0, it is easy to check that this thing here is basically a dark state. It does not project onto B. Okay, it does not project onto B. Can you see the last part of my slides, Vijay, at the end of my slides?
Yes, Manas.
Okay. So this does not project onto B, and it acts like a dark state. So okay, so basically which means that if I change my J coupling such that I can vary my J coupling, which is basically like varying this theta parameter, such that I can go from A to C, and basically this basically means that I can have a transfer from A to C without doing much to B. Okay, so that is the general idea, and we are interested in what happens to the nonlinear in the interacting system case. So before that, let me just show a motivational slide that this notion has already sort of in the linear regime been discussed actually in the context of optomechanics, where you have this kind of setup that I have written here, and this G here, which is this capital G, which is like the J of T, can be actually implemented in optomechanical setups. And here what happens is that you have 2 cavities. This is a schematic. You have 2 cavities, A1 and A2, and then you have a mechanical mode in the middle. So basically it is you see the diagram here. So it is like you have 2 cavities with a mechanical mode in the middle. So question is, can you transfer from the first, between the first and the third cavity via the mechanical mode without any occupation in the mechanical mode during the process? Okay, so we have A1, B, A2. Okay, this M basically means mechanical. Okay, so this has been proposed, but I don't, to my understanding, stirrup realization in optomechanics is still not done. Okay, so okay, so basically the idea is that how do we understand this kind of situation in the nonlinear case? Okay, so okay, so I'll try to, I don't know if I can go to the full details, but basically in the nonlinear case, one can study dynamical equations in some semi-classical limit where we have given these notations and this dynamical equations, and then we can study stationary point solutions. Okay, we can study stationary point solutions of the system. Okay, so so we have this stationary point solutions with respect to some parameter t tilde. Okay, and we look for some special stationary point, special branch that facilitates the transfer from cavity A to cavity C by slowly changing J1 and J2. Okay, so that is the idea. The idea is that I still have my complicated system that I still have my complicated system that I described here, and the question is, how do I sweep? How do I change J1 and J2 such that I can go from I can move the photon from A to C, and in that process not even occupy B in that process. Okay, so so these are the stationary point solutions that are given here. So you see that you have many of these solutions. Forget about the colored dots here, red and green. Just focus on the gray lines. Okay, so basically what this says is that you have these many branches, and if I start with a particular branch here and adiabatically change the system, I should be able to follow this branch. So look at this this branch here. There's a branch which basically okay, yeah, there's a branch which basically, this is NA. There's a branch which basically goes from 20 to 0. Okay, and then there's exactly the same branch that goes for NC from 0 to 20, and the NB basically stays at 0. So if I start at this branch and adiabatically change the parameters of the Hamiltonian, then I should be able to achieve perfect state transfer. Okay, so this is the idea. So I start with this special branch, and I prepare the system at this branch, and then I do real-time dynamics, slow dynamics, such that I can achieve a photon state transfer. So notice that it cannot be too slow, because this is a very complicated system and it has these vertical lines here, which I will explain later. These vertical lines are regions where the system is chaotic. So the logic is, if you go too slow, then you will start hitting chaotic zones, and that is bad. But at the same time, I cannot go too fast, because then I'm not able. Then I will not be adiabatically following the system. So there is a optimal way to sweep the system. Okay, and this red and blue that is shown here is basically faster sweep rate and slow sweep rate. So you see that when I sweep very fast, in fact the red is basically helping me achieve very good state transfer. But if I sweep it very slow like the blue, you see that I end up with inefficient state transfer. Okay, so the logic is, you find some special branch and try to follow that branch, but at the same time it's a complicated branch in the sense that the system can be chaotic, so I cannot be too slow. At the same time, I cannot sweep very fast, because then I may jump to some other branch, which is not the optimal branch. Okay, so I apologize if this I'm going a bit fast on this, but I hope the idea is clear that there is a delicate interplay between adiabaticity and chaos, in the sense that adiabatic theorem says that upon slowly varying the parameters of the Hamiltonian, the system remains in the Hamiltonian's instantaneous eigenstate. But this implies that sweep rates cannot be too fast, irrespective of whether the Hamiltonian is interacting or non-interacting. On the other hand, the sweep rates cannot be too slow if the system is interacting, okay, or if the system is chaotic, to be precise. So, so this is the idea. The idea is that if I start with some initial conditions, say here, then basically the red is basically the occupation of the first cavity, and you see it changes from 20 to 0. Okay, so that is the idea here. Okay, so let me yeah, so let me discuss the vertical lines, which is the Lyapunov equations. So Lyapunov exponents. So basically, one can study regions where you have basically chaotic regions. So basically, there's a parameter space in the Hamiltonian where you have positive Lyapunov exponents, and there's a regime in the Hamiltonian parameter space where the system is chaotic, and that gives us the vertical lines discussed earlier. And this is a plot which is showing that if I drive too slow, then also it is not efficient. If I drive too fast, then also it is not efficient. But if I drive optimally, if I change the pulse optimally, then I can get a very satisfactory transfer. Okay, so even if you don't understand the way we have done it, just our final results I wanted to show. So this is basically the setup. Okay, the setup is I have say 4 units, and I am essentially plotting. So these are 4 units: 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's A, B, C, D. Okay. So now see what happens to the population of the 4 units. So so you see that the Na goes from 20 to 0. Nd goes from 0 to 20. Okay, and NB and NC basically almost remain 0 in the process. Okay, so that means that I have transferred from A to D without really impacting B and C. And this is basically a comparison between semi-classical and quantum results for 3 units. So just to say that we have, wherever it's possible, we compare the exact quantum and semi-classical results. So even though you may not have got the idea of how to do this protocol, the results are basically quite clear. So let us look at, for example, this result here. You see that I managed to transfer photons from first cavity from 20, it has become 0, and the third cavity has gone from 0 to 20. And the middle cavity is basically here. The middle cavity is not at all occupied. Okay, so that brings me to the conclusion. So we demonstrated a protocol for achieving high transfer efficiency, and it is far from obvious since we are dealing with scalable systems. So it's not entirely clear how you would transfer from say even from 1 to 3 without going through B, without occupying B in the process. So there's also a deep connection between Lyapunov exponents and these nonlinear schemes, and we can successfully achieve our target for fully quantum cases. And you can even transfer Fock states, coherent states, cache states, and so on. So so as Outlook, we want to adapt and extend these protocols to a variety of engineered Hamiltonians, where variety of engineered Hamiltonians are achieved. So, for example, there are some ongoing discussions in optomechanical setups, and there's a fundamental question that we want to address, where we want to study the OTOC for this kind of system, and also address Lyapunov exponents, because this is a unique system where there are a lot of chaotic and non-chaotic regimes. So basically, this entire parameter space, we have different regimes where the system is non-chaotic and chaotic and so on. So that is the goal. So I'll just leave with Vijay, I'm out of time, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll just leave with some other things that we have been doing, but that's I don't have time to discuss that. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, Manas, thank you so much for this wonderful talk. So since we are out of time, maybe we can just have one question. So Prasanna, are you're
Yeah,
I can see you. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
If there is no one else, I just had one question. So, is it fair to say that this? Can you understand this stirrup mechanism as basically as you tune some parameter, you're changing your nature of your eigenstate, right? So what you're doing is initially in that, if you take that example of 4 cavities, you go from an eigenstate where it is basically localized in cavity 1 to finally the final state that's where with an eigenstate localized in cavity 4. That's sort of what happens when you do it, right? So
Exactly.
Okay. So that is the physics. Okay.
That is the right.
And so
right.
there are leaks. I think one thing that might be interesting, which you might know, is there were these schemes to try and do this shuttling of photons that Duncan had by just moving a mirror. I don't know what it translates to if you have a circuit. So you can actually do this kind of stirrup schemes by starting with 2 cavities and just moving the mirror.
Right. I see. Okay.
Or something like that. So this might be also interesting.
Right. I think I just wanted to make one comment to that. So the reason we are actually one of the reasons that we are interested in this moving from 1 to C by barely occupying B is that even if you have a bad mode in the middle, bad cavity in the middle,
exactly,
you will not face the impact of the bad cavity because you hardly spend any time in the bad cavity.
Right.
Okay. So
Absolutely.
that is the idea, and that's the thing. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we should finish this talk here. So thank you once again, Manas, for
thank you.
talk.